Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Wednesday, June 15th, 2022. Tonight, we're talking about parental trauma and asking participants in the live broadcast to share their stories. As you might be aware, we've done this kind of format before where I'm going to present for a little while, maybe for 20 or 30 minutes, and then I'm going to take stories and respond to those. So you don't have to have a question. You're welcome to submit a question anytime that you submit during the live broadcast to my moderator Malia. She'll take those questions and she'll submit them then publicly, or she'll display them publicly anonymously. So you don't have to worry about that. We'll take care of that. So at any time you want to put something in the chat and share it, I'll get to it as we go. But let's get into, first of all, some of the things I want to talk about to lay a foundation for you sharing your stories this evening. I can't emphasize this too much, that your fear, your stress, your trauma, your triggers are valid. That just because I talk about it in terms of taking care of yourself and not handing those to your children doesn't mean, and people misinterpret it all the time, that they hear me saying, don't share it, don't feel it, it's not real, don't feel what you're feeling. That's not at all the message. These things are real. In fact, one of the goals for tonight's broadcast is to give you, even if it's through this virtual form, a space to be able to unload it, to share it with the community. Part of what we need, one of the hardest and most difficult things to teach parents and people and couples and even therapists. I would want you all to know that most therapists struggle with this. And part of the response that therapists have to clients sharing their pain, we call it, or refer to it as an old term called countertransference, um, is that we have this inability at times to sit with somebody quietly in their unsolvable problem. And so it's really important to think about that practice, to think that that's part of the job. There's a lot of things that we can't take away from people. We can't take away the loss of a loved one, and any sort of look on the bright side message will feel like dismissive. It'll feel, excuse me, erasing. The modern day language for that kind of thing is gaslighting. It refers to an old movie made in the, and I think the late 1930s with Ingrid Bergman, where somebody turned off the gas lights on a house to try to make the other person feel crazy because they were going to discover some of the things that they've been doing. So part of what we learn to do in this process, and a key task in attachment, is to just sit with somebody in their unsolvable problems. So whatever trauma you have from your background, and we all have varying degrees of trauma, some a lot more, some a lot less. When your child struggles, when your child's mental health issue creates risks, creates potential dangers, damage to the family, you have trauma on top of trauma, on top of attachment issues. One of the things we learn in studying people that are exposed, for example, to severe examples of trauma like war, is that these folks have, before their exposure to it, they have a lot of attachment trauma or developmental trauma. In other words, they didn't have a secure base to start with. I was just teaching a group of professionals last night as we welcome them to our intensive program in our intensive house. I was describing this issue, that part of what we work towards as we try to repair our attachment is that sense, that feeling that comes when we have a secure attachment, that we're okay. And when we have that base or that foundation, this is really important to parents. When you know that you're okay, you're more capable of listening. When you don't know that you're okay, you will defend yourself. And what it will sound like is telling people that you're a good person, telling them that it wasn't your intention, just defending the threat that somebody's hurt or upset with you. So a secure attachment is a secure base, a secure reference point. We carry around a copy inside of us that reinforces the idea that we're okay. I didn't get as much in childhood. This is me talking now. I didn't get as much in childhood as I would have liked, as I needed, and maybe nobody does. And so part of what I've built for myself for the past 24 years is a reparative experience with a therapist. And so I carry around in my head, in my heart, my therapist, Dr. Jamie Gill. So when a client, when a child of mine, my own children, when my spouse tells me that I did something wrong or I hurt them, I can kind of lean on that attachment, lean on that validation that's kind of consistently in there for me and hear the other person, welcome their expressions of hurt and anger and frustration at me. Um, Part of this process is developing skills, making sure that we have other resources, and creating a shift in us. Understanding what it means to be a good parent means that when the child tells us they're angry, they're upset, they're sad, they're frustrated, that we can empathize and resonate with them. Instead of what most of us are inclined to do, which is to try to talk them out of their feelings. That's the real big shift. Part of tonight's process on this particular broadcast is to listen to the stories of others and learn how they've navigated this water, this terrain. Part of why we go to Al-Anon groups or other support groups is to listen to other people who are experiencing similar kinds of traumas. The trauma of having somebody that you care deeply about that is doing something to harm themselves. We learn from them how to navigate it. We learn from them that it's okay to set boundaries for ourselves, to take care of ourselves first. I was just teaching this weekend that when we can take care of ourselves and set healthy boundaries, our capacity to support others increases. And I don't think that's an intuitive idea. Let me explain it again. When we can say no, when we can take care of ourselves with healthy boundaries, there's a shift correlated with that work where we can listen to other people. We can hold space for them or be gentle with them, be compassionate toward them, not give them lectures, not give them answers, not give them advice. Those are all qualities of somebody who's taking care of themselves. When I talk about therapy, when I talk about our therapeutic intensives, and I'm going to make a real big emphasis of that tonight, the gift is sitting with a capable other. We call it a container in therapy, borrowed from developmental psychoanalytic culture. This idea of being a container. And being a container means that person listens, is not reactive, is flexible in their responses instead of knee jerk, is compassionate, is non-judgmental, is authentic, is curious. A non-container is triggered, reactive, spooked and scared, worried, anxious, sad, overwhelmed. You know that when you have those kinds of reactions to people, you know that you're less available to them. So the idea tonight is that when we develop a sense of self by doing our own work, we can be better there for others that we love. And how do we do that? How do we do this work? We talk about the work all the time. We do this work by going to a therapist who's not interested in fixing us, but rather interested in understanding us or finding us, as I like to say, who can sit there calmly and empathically and mirror back a sense that we are okay. Sitting with a container for months and years on end is the road to healing, is the road to building this foundation. So the effects of trauma in our life, shame is a powerful effect. When we are afraid that if we show who we are, that other people won't love us or find us worthy or respect us or care about us or want to be with us. So we're inclined to shrink. Shame is that visceral feeling of wanting to hide and get small, wanting to literally or figuratively cover your face. Another effect of trauma often is that we lean or we're tempted into or we're susceptible to addiction, to habitual self-medication. We're habitually averse to being present in our own lives. That's really what substance abuse disorder is about. Substance use disorder is about, and self-medicating behaviors are about. It's an attempt to not be present in our life. And I'm not talking about something that we do once in a while or one off. I'm talking about something that develops habitually. We, of course, isolate. I cannot tell you how common it is at our intensive programs for people to come from a variety of backgrounds, and for 2 or 3 of them, sometimes more, of the 7, that's the group size, that's the maximum, um, saying to us, "I don't think my story is worthy of sharing. I don't think I have enough trauma, enough difficulty, enough hardships." That's that isolation. That's what tells us that we're even our pain and our sadness and our frustration and our anger isn't worthy of being heard. Of course, we have poor reality testing. If you grow up in a traumatic environment that's unstable and chaotic and unsafe, you're less capable of discerning what's real and what's not. You're less capable of recognizing health and sickness in others, healthy and unhealthy relationships. Of course, there's unresolved grief and mourning that happens with trauma. It kind of leads to post traumatic stress disorder. That means after the stress is gone, after the immediate threat is gone, we're easily triggered and reminded of that old stress. It's like the veteran of war who comes home and hears a motorcycle backfire on the street and falls to the ground as if it's a gunshot. We have developmental delays, which means we don't progress. We don't develop a sense of self. We struggle with intimacy. We struggle with finding peace and serenity for ourselves. Of course, mental health symptoms like mood disorders. The traumatic response, the trauma response is inflexible. It is rigid. It's repetitive. There's no thought that goes into it. I love the slogan from Al-Anon and CODA and other recovery programs that reminds us that if it's hysterical, it's historical, meaning that if we have a reaction that some might or many might suggest is bigger than the situation dictates or would suggest, you're overreacting kind of messages. That if we're overreacting, it's because it connects to something historical in us. So there's really no overreaction. It's just, can we connect to the trigger, the trauma, the past, the old situation that is being revisited. A trauma response prevents us from being curious and patient. Everything is high stakes. Everything has to be fixed now. We're not capable of listening and sitting with the other because we feel a lack of safety. And the only way we can get it is by fixing and resolving the issue that's set before us. Response flexibility is a term that Daniel Siegel in Parenting from the Inside Out and Mary Hartzell talk about. Is this ability to digest, to sit with an event, a situation, a comment, a relationship, and to think about how we want to respond. What we're talking about is that if the bottom part of the brain is the part of our brain that is the fight or flight part of the brain, the survival, the oldest part, the first part that develops, if that is activated, we lose connection. We are hijacked. Our brain is hijacked, and we don't have access to the upper part of the brain and the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that can make decisions, that can weigh consequences, that can look into the future and make decisions that will have some effect on the future. Creativity is lost when you see, if you're walking along and you see a snake on the trail, you jump back. If you're about to cross the street, you're not paying attention, and you hear a call, you jump back and you fall, because that's what the body and the brain need to do to protect you. But what happens for trauma survivors, or those of us, I shouldn't even talk about it like it's a big T trauma, a big thing. What happens for those of us who haven't unraveled our trauma is everything becomes a threat. We lose, like I said, reality testing. We don't know if this is really a threat. If my 6th grader gets a bad grade or my 8th grader gets a bad grade, and I start to go down the path and saying, well, they're not going to get into a good high school, they're not going to get into a good college, They're not going to get a good job. They're not going to be able to support themselves, and they're going to end up in the gutter. That's almost a humorous kind of people call it future tripping. Sometime we go on this trip into the future and see how everything could be bad. There was a commercial for an insurance company that did that recently, humorously. It talked about, don't be like Brad. Brad didn't get his insurance and he got in a car accident and he lost all his money, lost his job. His wife left him, his children left him, and he ends up in a ditch. Don't be like Brad and get our insurance. Being able to respond in flexible ways is one of the biggest challenges of being a parent. Response flexibility is the ability of the mind to sort through a wide variety of mental processes, such as impulses, ideas, and feelings, and come up with a thoughtful, non-automatic response. Response flexibility is the opposite of a knee-jerk reaction. It involves the capacity to delay gratification and to inhibit impulsive behaviors. This ability is the cornerstone of emotional maturity. There's some comments that I make sometimes that are very sweeping. But one of them that you can be confident of is that when we lose our ability to slow down the process, when we feel threatened by things, we are in a trauma response or in a situation where our brain perceives that we're being presented with something that is threatening to us, and we must act quickly in the most decisive and sharp way possible. I love this idea because as we talk about trauma and how to process our emotions and our trauma experiences, we contrast that with resiliency. Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell said, a lot of the quotes from tonight are from them. Research suggests that children who have had a positive connection have a source of resilience for meeting life's challenges. And what predicts the ability of a parent to provide that positive connection and its subsequent resilience to life challenges is if a parent has sorted out their work, their life. As Alice Miller says, if they've discovered and explored the unique emotional history of their childhood. That's the work. I will tell you, and I believe this, it's my life as a therapist, it's my life as a father, it's my life as a husband, an employer, a friend, the whole gamut. My work is to work on myself. As the writer Anne Lamott says, the greatest gift that we can give to our children is our own work. As Ram Dass says, the only thing I can do for you is work on myself. And the only thing you can do for me is work on yourself. When we do our work, when we understand ourselves, when we understand our triggers, we understand where they came from, we're working on that, we are more capable of love. We're more able to set boundaries and meet the guilt that comes when we do. So when we attend to ourselves and take care of ourselves, that's when we provide for our children and others a better, more authentic version of ourselves. It's not like a better version of ourselves, like we're making something out of nothing. We become ourselves. We become who we are. I read a quote today, an old quote that says by a philosopher and a Jungian analyst, Michael Mead, and he said, "The becoming who we are requires the greatest amount of change. Becoming who we truly are." Again, more from Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell. Research in the field of child development has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment to parents is strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own life experiences. If you have questions about how to help your child, do your work. Go to Al Anon, go to CODA. If you have the time and the money, come to an intensive. Immerse yourself in an experience of exploring yourself, understanding your triggers. Watch other people do it. Learn from them. Going on, Siegel and Hartzell say, research has clearly demonstrated that our child's attachment to us will be influenced by what happened, but not what happened to us. Or excuse me, let me reread this. Research has clearly demonstrated that our children's attachment to us will be influenced by what happened to us when we were young if we do not come to process and understand those experiences. In other words, we will pass on our level of differentiation, our unprocessed trauma. In family systems theory, they call this intergenerational transmission of trauma. And people that are willing to do their work become the chain breakers, the ones who are breaking the chain of trauma. Siegel and Hartzell say, even if we have come to understand ourselves well, our children will still make their own journey through life. Although we may supply them with a secure foundation through our own deeper self-understanding, our role as parents serves to support our children's development, not guarantee its outcome. Take a picture of the slide if you're watching, or if you're listening, go to the YouTube channel, go to Evoke's YouTube channel and click to this slide and take a picture. This kind of puts it all together, takes it away from cause and effect. If we have come to understand ourselves well, even when we have, our children still have to make their way through life. And although we can provide them with a secure foundation that I'm describing this evening, because of our deeper self-understanding, our role as parents serves to support our children's development, not to guarantee its outcome. And that's where, as they say, we stop and they start. I will often say to an adolescent whose parents are beginning their work or stumbling to find their footing as they figure themselves out, I will say to them in private or sometimes in a family session, I'll say, look, if I was you, I'd feel the same way that you feel growing up in this house. If I was your parent's child, I would feel the same anger and frustration and overwhelm and powerlessness as you're sharing with us. And those dents and those bruises are worthy of our exploration, your exploration, for sure, throughout your life. But it is your life. It's your life. And if you continue to hurt yourself instead of sorting it out, it will be your life that suffers. And of course, I tell the parents, all you can do is work on yourself. You can't achieve perfection. You can't arrive at the finish line. You can just work on yourself and apologize when you make mistakes. And by so doing, you show your children what it means to be a human. You teach them accountability, which almost every parent wants to teach a child. Thinking of the high road and the low road, that really refers to the structure of the brain, high and low, not some kind of abstract moral reference. When we're in the high road, or we're not in a trauma response, in a fight or flight response, this is what Siegel writes. He says, a form of processing information that involves the higher rational reflective thought processes of the mind. High road processing allows for mindfulness, flexibility in our responses, and an integrating sense of self-awareness. The high road involves the prefrontal cortex and its processes. The low road, or the fight or flight, or when the trauma response gets triggered, low mode processing involves the shutting down of the higher processes of the mind and leaves the individual in a state of intense emotions, impulsive reactions, rigid and repetitive responses, and lacking in self-reflection and the consideration of another's point of view. In other words, they can't mentalize. They can't put themselves in the other person's shoes. Involvement of the prefrontal cortex is shut off when one is on the low road. So this is similar to the broadcast I did a couple of weeks ago about what does a trauma response look like. You're starting to understand and hear the descriptions and examples. On the low road, these intense emotions can lead you to have knee-jerk reactions instead of thoughtful responses. When you're feeling stressed out or find yourself in situations with your child that trigger past unresolved issues, your mind may shut off and become inflexible. Again, this is the one confusing part. The job of a parent is to be the adult. I wrote something. I'd love people's opinions if they had it. I've been really reluctant to share this on my social media, but I came up with a quote just recently that said, you know, while I know that medication is essential and critical for many people and managing their mental health, we are often in the position where children are being medicated because the parent is overwhelmed. We and so the work becomes to work on your overwhelm. But most people, including me, I just want to be clear. Everything I teach you on every podcast I ever do of any value comes from my own work and struggling in these same areas. Most of us try, including me, to make the child fit into our bandwidth, to what we can tolerate. And we tell them it's for their own good and that that's the way the world works. But if we haven't done our work, if we haven't explored, I don't care if your remembrance of your childhood was good or non-eventful. Doesn't matter. That's not the thing that makes the change, good or bad childhoods. It's whether or not we've explored it. I think I shared a couple of months ago that I was watching a recent 3-part documentary of Paul McCartney being interviewed after the Peter Jackson story of Apple Studios and then their last concert. And at one point, Paul McCartney said, "You know, when I left home as a child, I thought everybody's home was supportive and nurturing, and everybody encouraged each other. And then I got out into the world, and I realized that wasn't the case." You might think, "Well, that's not a bad thing to be surprised by." But if you don't have experience with suffering, if you don't have experience with the kinds of things that go on in some families, how can you be there for somebody who has been, who is going through that, who might be struggling or suffering? No parents really feel good about themselves or what they may have done to their children in this low road state of mind. And yet, when parents have not reflected on their own experiences, they can return again and again to the low road. I want to say something with as much passion, emphasis, and encouragement as I can. I know I talk a lot about parents, and I know I talk a lot about the impact of a parent on a child, but it's not about shame or judgment or criticism. I'm just describing something. It's just the way that it works. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and guilty, if when I talk about the impact and the dents that we put in our children, that you go to that place again of threat and fear and defense because that feels threatening, there's something to explore there. But maybe most important, what you're doing is you're taking a description that I'm giving, and you're forgetting that you're a child too, and so are or were your parents and their parents and so on. This is how human beings develop. So, what do we ask parents to do? Read, go to therapy, attend support groups. Tonight's going to be a small version of that. To learn to understand the ununderstandable. In other words, one of my favorite quotes is, "If you want to understand me, just know that I am not you, and everything will make a lot more sense after that." It's what I talk about when I explain that Gandhi taught us that to love other as other. I talk about this in the Audacity to Be You in a whole chapter. To love other as other means that we have heroically taken on the responsibility for our own journey. That our unhappiness, as the author Connie Zweig writes in her follow up to the book about the shadow and understanding the dark and the scary parts of ourselves, when she says, "Until we understand that our unhappiness is because of the way that we're living our lives, we don't grow up. We don't become adults. If our children are making us unhappy, if our children are, objectively speaking, just triggering us, they're causing our responses, we haven't taken responsibility for our own lives. We have to learn to understand the other." I said it in the Audacity to Be You in that same chapter, I believe, where I stated, and I said, to understand someone else, to understand your child or your spouse, you have to lose your mind. And of course, it's a play on words. And what I'm referring to is you have to forget about the way you see the world, deep enough and mindfully enough to listen to the other. We learn to treat the issue when we're on the high road rather than the symptom. And we realize that the child's response to treatment, in part, is a big part of what we can't control. For the child, we try to empower the child. We try to listen to the child at our intensives that we do with families. I always say that when it's successful, the parents walk away understanding that they have a new project and that it's not to fix the child, but to fix themselves. And what the children walk away from is, if it's successful, is they feel heard. We focus on the relationship, the communication. We explore cognitive distortions, thinking errors, and find their root or their origin, and we validate those. A client driven approach is really important. I talk and teach our therapists all the time. Anytime your model, your intervention, your technique, your clever interpretation, I get so proud of my interpretation sometimes. Anytime those supersede or eclipse the child, become more important, you have an agenda, you miss the child. I like the phrase unshaming. Part of a neutral response from a therapist is to say, yeah, that's what we do sometimes. When we're scared, when we're hurt, we go into dark caves, we drink from the dark waters, from the poison waters, as Khalil Gibran says. That's what we do. We're honest and authentic. We don't treat clients as if they're fragile. We focus on their successes in each small step that they take to rediscovering who they are, their lost or exiled parts of themselves that they've been taught to get rid of because they were unacceptable or intimidating or didn't fit within the family's model, is part of the work. And of course, always looking at the function of the symptom. We don't treat symptoms. We just don't. That's not Evoke's model. We use the symptoms and we follow what I call the trail of crumbs home to find the self and where it's been wounded. We don't ask you to trust the process. I used to use that phrase that's popular in treatment 20 years ago. We don't ask you to trust the process. We ask you to come with your distrust. When a client comes to me at an intensive and says, I'm skeptical, I say, thank you for telling me. Tell me more about that. And then they will proceed to tell me about experiences where people who love them or therapists who they trusted hurt them. And then I will say to them, it makes sense why you don't trust the process. So the take home before I take your comments: trauma is inescapable, but healing from it is elective. The goal, and I say in kind of a strange way these days, knowing your trauma responses and discovering your trauma is the work. That's what I mean by the subtitle, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self. The things that you've been told that are unacceptable or not okay are part of your trauma responses, your adaptations, your maladaptive ways of coping. I say it this way to get people's attention, and I believe it. I really believe this next statement. Mental health is not about getting better. Mental health is knowing how crazy you are. And I use the word crazy on the continuum from simple, harmless neuroses to, of course, the most severe end. If you know you're crazy, I know I'm crazy. I know I have limitations. I know I have triggers. I know I snap at my family. All of those things. That's the only hope that I have, because we never arrive. Like I said, there's no such thing as an overreacting. It's just we're not really making the connection to what we're really reacting to. Everybody listening to me knows that. Everybody who's been in a couples relationship knows that you might be fighting over something silly, seemingly, but if you have the patience as a couple to work through it and to peel back the layers, you find that it relates to something deep and often historical. We learn to be kind to ourselves. I do this a lot, right? I do these podcasts a lot. It'll be 15 years in December. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 1400 broadcasts. I don't know the number anymore. And I say things like learn to be kind to yourself, and everybody agrees and gets it. Almost nobody does it. It's not natural. If you find somebody who's kind to themselves, they'll feel calm and zen-like. They'll feel loving and capable. They'll have really clear boundaries. The Dalai Lama doesn't have bad boundaries. Gandhi didn't have bad boundaries. Mother Teresa didn't struggle with boundaries. Now, all the stories we hear about them are about their great compassion, because that's the exciting, sexy stuff, right? That's what gets the press. But all of the people, and the list goes on, take care of themselves first. The Buddha meditates for days and years on end. I shared the other day with somebody, Christ was late to the boat. Yes, he had to walk on water, which is a great story, but he was late because he was taking care of himself. He prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane long enough that the apostles kept falling asleep. It was too long for them. They are really good. Muhammad, right? The Buddhist monks, they are good at taking care of themselves. The wise ones have the best boundaries, and subsequently then have the most capacity for compassion. But where do you learn that? You learn it by sitting with an empathic other who doesn't judge, who doesn't try to fix you, who isn't anxious to resolve things, who doesn't try to graduate the client, who knows that it's a silly idea to graduate a client because our work is lifelong. The client can stop anytime they want. But a therapist who graduates the clients is sharing with you the limitations of their ideas and their model. They're telling you, I don't know how to work beyond this. All I know how to do is address this one symptom or this one issue or this one stage of life, and then I don't know how to sit with you longer. We have to find safe places and create competing experiences with those earlier experiences in our lives. That's what we're trying to create as therapists. Competing experiences, reparative experiences. If we don't resolve our unhealed trauma, if we don't attend to our anxieties, we will give them to our children and they will feel responsible for them. Anxiety itself is a trauma response. It takes a lifetime to improve this stuff. It's your life's work. And you're going to make mistakes, and your children are going to find your limits, and everybody will find your limits. And the more work you do, the more you accept that. And so you learn to take a time out, walk away, take a walk, do what you need to do. And the work is joy and freedom and peace and liberation and love. That's what the work is. All right, I'm happy to take comments from the audience. Thanks for Malia for passing them on. Somebody writes, my son has been in treatment for over a year. Every time something good happens, he does something to prevent the growth trajectory he is on. He was asked to leave 2 places each time. He was weeks away from graduating to a more independent life. At present, he was evicted from his apartment but found a job. The blame game continues, and he never takes ownership for his actions. He uses everyone, destroys everything, and we are exhausted. I can feel that. It's hard to watch someone we love self-sabotage over and over again, especially when they're on the precipice of success. Somebody writes, I experienced 7 out of the 10 ACEs. ACEs is an acronym for adverse childhood experiences. It's a scale to see what your childhood was like. I experienced 7 out of the 10. And I'm just now entering the recovery process 2 years in due to my son's addiction. We're all doing well as we're all moving towards transparent communication. All is me, my son, who is 18 and in recovery now for 18 months, and my youngest, 14. I am only now figuring out that I cannot utilize the forgiveness mantra as my ex, who would not pay for the 18-year-old's treatment, which is why I left him, and in doing so, saved multiple lives. Will never admit to doing anything wrong. So how can I forgive someone who has not done anything wrong? Right. I had a breakthrough today with my therapist who identified my ex as a narcissist, in that perhaps it is not the forgiveness that releases us as it is an action, but instead it is personal inner release of energy towards inner health versus forgiving somebody. It's really difficult. One of the most difficult parts of this process is when you have a partner, a co-parenting partner, or an ex who's not on the same page, not working with you. I always say it's like fighting a battle with a hand behind your back. You can win, you can survive, but it's you're going to be limited in your ability to kind of fight the battle. Somebody wrote, "We had many traumas, large and small. The worst for me was that my 12-year-old son would disappear for days or weeks on end without contact. I can't imagine that. I feared that he might be dead and that I would never know for sure what happened to him. I have a 14-year-old. I can't imagine my 14-year-old being gone for days. Hours is scary enough. See, all of this is real pain and real sadness and real sorrow." Somebody writes, "My son overdosed about a year ago. We had to do CPR and naloxone. It's a injection that helps people, that saves people's lives who are in cardiac arrest for opiate, who are going in cardiac arrest. It's a life-saving intervention. It can also, I believe, be taken through the breath, through the nose. I find that I'm easily triggered and go into a hyper-reactive mode. How do I deal with that? Find other people who have been through it. Come to an intensive and unravel it if you can. We have them online. Or again, Al-Anon is free. Codependence Anonymous is free. Go to places, to rooms, they call it. Find the rooms where people are talking about what you've been through. Hear how they've navigated. Hear how they've come out the other side or are coping with it. It's about not being alone in your sadness and your trauma. When we can't fix something, we can be with somebody in their suffering. And that takes extraordinary courage and strength to be with somebody in their unsolvable problems. And most people go to these support groups, Al-Anon, Coda, Families Anonymous, and I say this all the time. They secretly, maybe even subconsciously, expect that they're going to be given the silver bullet, right? The magic pixie dust. And when they walk in, they're told, this is not about your child. This is not about your husband. Go to those rooms where people are sharing and borrowing each other's strength and community to navigate painful, difficult, real life problems. Somebody writes, "I find that being able to trust my son again, after all, is the trauma and still a real struggle, even though he's now almost a year sober. Can you speak to that connection? Trust trauma." That's why therapy is so important. That's why, when people say to me, I've said this before, when people say, I don't want to go to Al-Anon. That's just a bunch of people complaining about their alcoholic children or alcoholic spouses. My response is, yeah, that's what it is. Go and complain there. My wife and I were just talking about this at lunch. I've been really busy in the last week, and she said and her friends have been busy. She's had some bad luck with her therapist and her friends and me. And she says, I find myself leaking on to other people because I haven't had this outlet. If I could talk to somebody, that's why we went to lunch. If I can talk about it, if I can unload it, then I can prevent the triggers. Find someone to talk with that won't fix it because it's unfixable, at least not by you. Find somebody I'm using words that are symbolic, right? Metaphorical. Find somebody that can hold you. I know it might seem like I'm saying something irrelevant. I'm going to tell the audience that's listening now and listening on the podcast, it is how human beings are made. It actually is the thing that causes the trauma, not the thing that happened to us. That's not the trauma. That's why I didn't love the title of Oprah's new book that says, "What happened to you?" It's a good start, but it's not what happened to you. And all the trauma-informed folks in the world that are teaching and writing and doing science on the brain with this stuff will tell you it's not what happened to you, but it is how you were supported in processing the trauma. Were you allowed to feel? Could you talk to somebody who could hold you, who wouldn't react, who wouldn't themselves be terrified and triggered and reactive? And if you're walking around right now, and there are numberless people, if you're walking around right now with an awareness of how anxious you are, it's because you don't have a secure base. It's because you didn't come from a secure enough attachment for what you're going through. So you've got to find people now to take care of you. That's the adult thing to do, folks. Everybody listening to me. The adult thing for you, the adult thing to do is for you to take care of yourself and not crossing your fingers that your kid will get better so that he or she or they will take care of you. That's what a child does. An adult walks into a free support group, attends these broadcasts like you're attending, listens to these podcasts like you're listening to, goes to therapy, goes to an intensive if they can. That's what adults do. They take care of themselves. Children wait for somebody to take care of them. You're not a child anymore. I mean, you are in a psychological sense. We all are. But as you become an adult, you take responsibility for your own serenity. You don't hand it to the child who is wholly incapable of managing it and carrying it. They're horrible at holding our serenity. In fact, if they're good at it, that's going to be another problem. They're going to become codependent like us. That's what the work is. And I know I sound elevated and excited about it, but I've spent 25, 26 years in wilderness therapy and now with our intensive program. I'm telling you, I bleed this stuff. I study, I read, I talk to folks. I do all that you can do. I think about this all day, every day. And everything I've seen leads me to the conclusion that you've got to take care of yourself and that the primary human condition or human wound is that we were asked to take care of our parents and we can't do it. We're bad at it. And it was never supposed to be that way. And we are ill equipped because when we take care of our parents or our spouses, I'm not talking about service and being there for people. Don't be mistaken. I'm talking about taking on the responsibility of somebody else's peace and serenity or handing it over to somebody else. When we are left as children to take care of our parents, when we feel responsible for our parents' grief and our parents' trauma, we sacrifice important aspects of who we are. And then that needs to be treated later. That's what we self medicate. Children are doing these things to try to find a way to be okay. Somebody writes, my child is back living at home, and when there are glimpses of old behavior, I get super anxious, pit in my stomach, and the loss of appetite, etc. My initial reaction in the moment is that he needs to leave again. It's a total overreaction, and I know that it's trauma from before he left for treatment. But when I separate my reaction from his behavior, I can see more clearly that he is just having a hard time. It's a pretty intense physical reaction that is a sign to me just how hard my previous experience with him was. I absolutely thank you. That's the work. That right there is the work. It's human. We're going to get triggered. I get triggered for not traumatic things. And when the human being, remember, I was talking about the low road. I was talking about knee-jerk responses. When human beings are threatened, it becomes black and white. There's no gray. It's all or nothing. It's absolute. What you're seeing in society by the polarization that we see in our culture and in our politics, that's a trauma response on a societal level. What the myths are trying to teach us is that villains aren't all bad and heroes aren't all good. That a human being is all of it. But threat turns us into black and white thinkers. And so when that person writes, when old behaviors start appearing, I go back to wanting to kick him out. I go back to that old trauma that I had. That's a real trauma stress response. But most importantly, what this person is also sharing with us is that's the work. And you got to go to therapy on a regular basis and you won't arrive. And I hope you guys I hope you keep going to therapy long after your kid gets better. One of my great sadnesses is when parents get really involved when their children are in crisis. And then when the children make it through and are functioning okay, that the parent stops working. I want to say to them, I want to say to all of them, that wasn't why you were going. You were going to manage and take care of yourself and heal and evolve and grow. The snake, as Nietzsche says, that does not shed its skin dies. If you're the same person 10 years from now that you are today, You've wasted 10 years. The work is forever. We have 2 kids in treatment right now, somebody says. They have different mental health issues, but both have been to multiple wilderness programs and residential treatment centers. Our trauma comes almost on a weekly or bi-weekly basis between the 2 kids' issues. We try to take care of ourselves, but we feel constantly on alert for the next call or text with bad news. I'm not kidding. We are on 2 years of these calls. Any thoughts or ideas on how to manage this stress or how to let go of their journey? I mean, the first thing I want to say is you're doing it. You're sharing. You're showing up. This is the practice. Tell your story. You've got to tell your story. Remember, Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, what he modeled for us was when children were scared or worried or overwhelmed because of war or what was going on in the 60s, he never tried to get them to be happy, ever. When someone was scared, he didn't try to get them to be not scared. When someone was angry, he didn't try to get them to be not angry. Watch Watch the 2 movies that came out in 2018-19. The one with Tom Hanks and the one that's the documentary. Watch them. That's your work. That's your assignment this week. Watch those. And watch what he does. All he does is give a place for people to share their feelings. And when we're allowed to share our feelings, we move through it. I wrote this on social media this week. I wrote this quote. When we feel, we allow feelings to move through us. Or in other words, we move through our feelings. When they can't be felt, when our feelings can't be felt, we get stuck in them. Or in other words, they get stuck in us and they become an expression. They get expressed through our mental health symptoms. You have to feel and you have to have safety and you have to have connection. I don't do this alone. So if you ask me, how do you do this work? My answer is in my life, it doesn't have to be yours, is I find a therapist. I've been to hundreds of 12-step meetings in my life. I find safe places to feel and be me. And some of my grief, see, there's no, my father died 2020 of COVID. Some of you might know. And my dad really left us when I was a child, wasn't there for us. He tried a couple of times throughout my adult life to try to be there, but he was never capable of really being there. Nobody can fix that. But it left a dent or two in me. In fact, it's part of what left a dent that I struggled with for 20, 30 years of my life. But that's my job to pick it up now. That's my work. And nobody on this broadcast, nobody I talk to can take away those dents, but they can give me a safe place to kind of feel and undent myself. That's what therapy is. And I'm sorry because most therapists have all these techniques and these models for fixing people and removing this symptom and removing that symptom. But the masters didn't teach that. That's not what therapy was supposed to be. I read a quote from Carl Jung today, one of the great masters of all time. And he said it's learning to make friends with our neuroses, to understand it, to sit with it. A great writer said, I don't try to exile my demons. I ask them questions like where they got the scratches, what they're afraid of, what are they trying to tell me. When I learned about all of this connection between psychology and mythology, I learned about dreams, and I learned even in my dreams, realistically, to stop and to ask the dog or the lion or the alligator that was chasing me or the guy that was trying to break into my house, all in my dreams. I learned to stop and say, what do you want to tell me? What are you trying to get at? We have to face fear. We have to face our shadow. We have to face our darkness. But the problem is, we've been told that the darkness is something to be afraid of, that it is evil because it is scary. But that's where the healing is. As Carl Jung said, the only way to understand somebody else's darkness, in other words, the only way to understand your child and their mental health issues is to know your own darkness. He said that 70 years ago. I don't know exactly when, but many years ago. Long before Daniel Siegel said it. Long before Mary Ainsworth said it. She's another attachment theorist and researcher. Long before Gabor Mate said it. Long before Brene Brown said it. It's been said for almost a century. We have to know ourselves. We have to talk about it. Last one before we close. Dealing with my 18-year-old son and his weed addiction. At 15, he started this. It led to illegal activity behind our backs, and he got arrested. The arrest led ultimately to our choosing to put him in a residential therapeutic program for 60 days, and then a 15-month stay at a therapeutic boarding school far away from us. Lots of painful times and real growth. He was doing really well by the time he graduated from the program. Now, a year later, he is reverting back to his addiction and betraying our trust. It's hard to see this. I'm really worried about how he will do when he goes off to college in September. I feel like we can't talk about this relapse with anyone except for my therapist. He doesn't think he needs therapy anymore. You're right. He can't listen to it probably at this point. Talking to your therapist or to your, if you're in Al-Anon or Coda, you can get a sponsor that you can call at odd hours or reach out to them at odd hours. You can go to your home group. Any of you who've walked into a meeting who have followed our request for all parents to go to 12-step groups will know that if you're a newcomer, that everybody in the group will write down their phone number and their name if they're willing to be called by you. That's where you take care of yourself, because your child can't, because he's dealing with his own addiction and his own demons, and he can't hold you. He wasn't built to. He was never supposed to. Children aren't supposed to take care of parents. It doesn't fare well for anybody. So I'm thankful that you're here. I'm thankful you're telling this story. You're not alone. You are not alone in this. I hope this was helpful. It was a little bit of a different format that we thought we'd try and share questions, share some empathy and connection with all of you. So thank you for sharing. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon and Audible. If you want to give back, our charitable partners are choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or familyfoundation.org. If you want to find your tribe and be with other people, we have support groups online for wilderness, current, and alumni families. The next one is tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m., June 16th. Or for the alumni group, we have one alumni only meeting per month. June 28th at 6:30 p.m. is that one. And then if you are an intensives alumni, July 12th, 6 p.m. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information or visit our website. I can't express this enough. The best thing you can do for your child, the best thing you can do to help your child, the one who's struggling, is your own work. And my favorite way to do it, I do it myself. I pay for my family. I pay for my employees to go to other programs to get this work done. Come to a Finding You intensive. June 22nd, we have a spot left. June 22nd through 26th, next week. I can't think of a better investment. We also have an online version. We have one in June. We're going to add one in July. We have the June online one actually is full, and we have a waiting list. So we're going to add one in July. We also have one August 26th. The online ones are shorter and about a third of the price. And then I'm going to be running a Returning to You for anybody who's been to a Finding You and wants to come back and do more work. October 12th through 16th, Returning to You. I can't wait for that. I'm going to have some great co-therapists with me at that time. If you want a coach, virtual coach, an attachment-based therapist who's trained in this model, you can contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. Parent coach, family coach, life coach, couples coach. It's kind of like therapy. It's not therapy technically because it's done virtually across state lines often. So it's coaching. We have pursuits adventure trips for families and young adults, anywhere from 3 to 30 days, customized for families. Think therapy light or sober fun. Like I've been saying all along tonight, we ask all current parents to attend 6 12-step support groups. If you're listening on the podcast, because most of our listeners are not parents in the program, I would beg you, just try it. I haven't said this in a couple of years, actually. Even if it doesn't add to your life, you know one thing from walking into a 12-step support group that you didn't know before. You know what it's like to walk into a group and take the risk of showing up as yourself. It's exactly what parents who send children to our program are asking the child to do. So if nothing else, it can provide you with an empathic, a moment that brings an empathy to you for your child and what you've asked them to do. Alanon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI.org, is a great place for free classes and resources in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app on your devices. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and again search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also watch on Evoke's YouTube channel and you can see the slides. And you can find Evoke and myself, Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and Dr. Brad Reedy, Dr. Bradreedy, at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives, and on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And the Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week from our staff and therapists. All right, folks, whatever's left over, I'll talk about on June 21st. Happy to get to that. Thank you for joining me this evening. For on behalf of the people that love you and that you love, thank you for being willing to do your work. I'll see you. For those of you who want to join me, you can also invite family and friends to the next broadcast, the question and answer on Tuesday, June 21st, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Thanks, folks. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.